You know that feeling when you're completely alone somewhere and suddenly every hair on your arm stands straight up? That creeping awareness that makes you freeze mid-step and hold your breath, straining to hear something you can't quite identify? I used to think that was just paranoia, the overactive imagination of someone who spent too much time in isolated places. Now I know better. Now I understand that our bodies sometimes pick up on things our conscious minds refuse to accept, and sometimes what's out there watching you is something that shouldn't exist. I need to tell this story from the beginning, even though part of me still can't believe it happened. My name is Margaret Chen, and I've been hiking and photographing wildlife in these forests for nearly 25 years. Started when I was barely 18, fresh out of high school, tagging along on camping trips with my grandmother, who knew every trail, every stream, every hidden meadow worth knowing in these parts. The Allegheny National Forest became my second home, and after Grandma passed, I kept coming back year after year, learning the land the way she had taught me. These aren't your well-maintained state park trails with mile markers and picnic benches every quarter mile. I'm talking about the deep backcountry, places where you can hike for 3 days without seeing another human being, where the tree canopy is so thick that noon looks like twilight, and where the nearest paved road is a brutal 6-hour trek through terrain that would break most casual hikers. I thought I knew these woods better than I knew my own apartment in Pittsburgh. I was wrong about that, as it turns out. Dead wrong. It started last autumn, sometime around mid-September, when reports began filtering through the small communities at the forest's edge about something destroying campsites in the remote northern sections. Not the usual bear damage where they tear into coolers and scatter garbage looking for food. This was different. This was violent in a way that didn't make sense. Tents shredded into ribbons, camp chairs twisted into unrecognizable shapes, and most disturbing of all, deep gouges carved into tree trunks at heights that would have required a ladder to reach. The Forest Service sent rangers to investigate, and the official word came back that it was probably a particularly aggressive black bear, maybe one that had been fed by careless campers and lost its fear of humans. Some folks whispered about a mountain lion, though cats that size are rare this far east, and they don't typically trash campsites like they're throwing a tantrum. The explanations didn't satisfy anyone who actually looked at the damage, but what else could anyone say? What other explanation made any kind of sense? I'd been finding strange tracks for weeks before I decided to set up my first camera. They appeared after heavy rains, preserved in the muddy sections of game trails where the soil was soft enough to hold an impression. At first glance, they almost looked like bear prints, which would have been unremarkable in this area. But something about them nagged at me every time I found a new set. They were too elongated, too narrow through the arch, and they appeared in patterns that suggested bipedal locomotion rather than the four-footed amble of a bear. The prints were enormous. I measured one set near a creek crossing, and the largest print was 17 inches from heel to toe and nearly 7 inches across at its widest point. I've seen plenty of bear tracks in my time, and even the biggest male black bear doesn't leave prints that dwarf a size 13 boot. More troubling was the stride length. Whatever made these tracks was covering ground in steps that would have had me jogging to keep pace, and it was walking in remarkably straight lines, not the meandering path a foraging bear would take. Then there were the claw marks. I found them on mature hemlock trees near several of the destroyed campsites, always in the same pattern. Vertical gouges running down the bark, starting at heights of 8 or 9 feet and extending down to roughly shoulder level. They weren't the random scratches of a bear marking territory or sharpening its claws. These looked deliberate, almost artistic in their precision, like something was demonstrating what it could do, or perhaps sending a message I didn't yet understand. One morning in late September, I was checking a trail camera I'd placed near a salt lick when I stumbled across a fresh set of those distinctive tracks. They led directly toward a clearing I'd been monitoring for years, a natural opening in the forest canopy, where a rocky outcrop created a small amphitheater of sorts, with a shallow cave visible at the base of a limestone cliff. I'd photographed everything from white-tailed deer to the occasional black bear in that clearing, and it was one of my favorite spots in the entire forest. But that morning, approaching the clearing felt different. The usual symphony of forest sounds was missing. No chickadees calling from the understory, no squirrels chattering territorial warnings, no crows cawing from the treetops. Even the insects seemed to have gone silent. The forest was holding its breath, waiting for something, and the weight of that silence pressed down on me like a physical force. That's when I decided to set up a dedicated surveillance camera. I'd been using trail cameras for wildlife photography for years. Nothing fancy, just reliable units that could capture decent images and short video clips when the motion sensor triggered. If something unusual was moving through the area on a regular basis, I wanted documentation. Maybe I'd finally get clear footage of whatever bear was causing all the trouble, or confirm the presence of a mountain lion that had wandered into the territory. I selected a spot about 25 yards from the edge of the clearing, mounting my camera on a sturdy beech tree that would hold it steady through wind and weather. The angle gave me an unobstructed view of the open area and the mouth of that shallow cave. I positioned the camera high enough that a curious deer wouldn't knock it askew, but low enough to capture anything walking through at ground level. The location felt right, remote enough that I wouldn't have to worry about other hikers discovering my equipment, but positioned along what appeared to be a natural wildlife corridor with game trails converging from multiple directions. I noted the date and time in the small notebook I always carried, September 23rd, around 2:30 in the afternoon. The plan was simple. Let the camera run for a week, then hike back to check what it had recorded. I'd done this routine countless times before, usually ending up with hundreds of photos of deer at dawn and dusk, the occasional wild turkey, and maybe a raccoon or a possum making its nightly rounds. Walking back to where I'd parked my Subaru, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The sensation was like an itch I couldn't scratch, a persistent awareness that something was tracking my progress through the trees. I stopped twice and turned to scan the forest behind me, but I never saw anything that would explain the feeling. Just shadows and tree trunks and the filtered afternoon light slanting through the canopy. Still, I found myself walking faster than usual, and I was genuinely relieved when I finally reached my car. The week passed with agonizing slowness. I went through my normal routines, working my shifts at the veterinary clinic, where I'd been employed for the past 15 years, coming home to my small apartment, trying to focus on television shows and books and anything that would distract me from thinking about that camera sitting in the forest, recording whatever passed through its field of view. Part of me expected to find nothing more exciting than the usual wildlife photos. But another part of me, the part that had seen those massive tracks and inexplicable claw marks, was hoping for something that would finally provide answers. September 30th arrived, and I made the long drive and longer hike back to the clearing. The camera was exactly where I'd left it, undisturbed, the small indicator light blinking to show the battery was still good and the memory card still had space. I retrieved the SD card and headed home, eager to see what the week had captured. That evening, I loaded the images onto my laptop and began scrolling through the results. The first several days showed the expected parade of forest wildlife. Deer moving through at dawn, a doe with twin fawns browsing on the vegetation at the clearing's edge, squirrels and chipmunks triggering the motion sensor with their constant activity. One nice shot of a red fox trotting through with something small and unfortunate in its mouth. Nothing out of the ordinary for the first 5 days. Then I reached the images from the 6th night. The timestamp showed 3:14 in the morning when the camera first triggered. The initial photo was dark, the clearing illuminated only by the camera's infrared flash, but something large was moving at the far edge of the frame. The second photo, captured 3 seconds later, showed it more clearly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Whatever it wasn't a bear. The figure stood fully upright, clearly bipedal and impossibly tall, taller than any human being I'd ever encountered, and I'd met some very tall people in my life. The body proportions were wrong for a person, though. The shoulders were too broad, the torso too thick and barrel-shaped, the arms too long for the overall frame. The entire figure was covered in what appeared to be dense, dark fur or hair, and it moved across the clearing with a fluid, purposeful stride that suggested both power and intelligence. But the third photo was what truly shattered my understanding of the world. The creature had moved closer to the camera, close enough that I could make out more details in the infrared image. It wasn't just passing through the clearing on some random nocturnal errand. It was looking directly at my camera. The flash had reflected off 2 eyes, giving them an eerie, luminescent quality. And the angle of the head made it absolutely clear that the creature had noticed my equipment and was actively examining it. The fourth and final photo in that sequence showed the empty clearing again. Whatever it was had moved on, but not before taking a long, deliberate look at my surveillance setup. I stared at those images for hours that night. I zoomed in until the pixels became meaningless blurs, adjusted brightness and contrast and every other setting my photo software offered, desperately trying to convince myself I was looking at something normal. Maybe it was just a bear standing on its hind legs, curious about an unfamiliar object in its territory. Maybe the camera angle and the harsh infrared lighting were playing tricks, making something ordinary appear strange and threatening. I called my friend Denise around midnight, unable to sit alone with what I was seeing. Denise and I had known each other since veterinary school, and she'd always been the skeptical one, the pragmatist who dismissed anything that couldn't be proven through empirical observation. I thought maybe she could talk me down, explain away what I was looking at, restore my faith in a rational universe where impossible things didn't walk through mountain clearings at 3 in the morning. But when I showed her the photos over video chat, her usual confident dismissiveness faltered. She kept asking me to zoom in, to adjust the angle, to show her the sequence again. After 20 minutes of silent examination, she finally said the words I'd been dreading. "Maggie, I don't know what that is. I've never seen anything like it." We stayed on the call for another hour, going through possible explanations. A person in a costume seemed unlikely given the remote location and the time of night. A bear standing upright didn't account for the proportions or the way the figure was clearly walking across the clearing. Rather than simply rearing up to sniff the air, some kind of elaborate hoax involving my camera equipment seemed paranoid and nonsensical. By the time we hung up, neither of us had found an explanation that made sense. And Denise made me promise to be careful if I went back to that area. By morning, I'd made a decision that I would later come to regret. I needed better footage, more angles, clearer images. If something that unusual was regularly moving through the area, I wanted to document it properly. I wanted proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I spent the next day gathering equipment from my apartment and making a trip to the outdoor supply store on the edge of town. I had 2 additional trail cameras in storage, older models, but still perfectly functional. I bought extra batteries, additional memory cards, and a spray bottle of scent eliminator to mask my presence while setting up the expanded surveillance network. The plan was to create a triangle formation around my original camera position, establishing overlapping fields of view that would capture anything moving through the clearing from multiple angles. I'd put one camera near the cave entrance, another on the opposite side of the clearing, and keep my original camera in its current position. With 3 different viewpoints, I'd be able to track movement patterns and gather much more comprehensive documentation of whatever was visiting the area. 2 days later, I hiked back into the forest with my expanded camera setup. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that usually made me grateful to be alive and able to spend time in places like this. But as soon as I approached the clearing, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet again, that same oppressive silence I'd experienced on my first visit after finding those tracks. No birdsong, no scampering of small animals through the leaf litter, no insect sounds despite the warmth of the day. The silence felt like a held breath, like the entire forest was waiting to see what I would do next. Setting up the first additional camera took longer than I'd anticipated. I wanted the angle to be perfect, capturing anything that approached the cave entrance from inside the clearing. Finding a tree with the right position and clear line of sight required more trial and error than I would have liked, and the whole time I worked, I couldn't shake the sensation of being observed. Every few minutes, I'd stop what I was doing and slowly scan the tree line around the clearing, searching for any sign of movement or any shape that didn't belong. I never saw anything obvious, but the feeling persisted, that crawling awareness between my shoulder blades that told me I wasn't alone. It was while positioning my third camera that I found the first fresh footprint. I was searching for the ideal mounting spot on a mature oak tree when I noticed the ground nearby was softer than the surrounding area. A slight depression had collected moisture from recent rains, creating a perfect medium for preserving impressions in the soil. And there, clear as if it had been deliberately placed for me to find, was one of those massive tracks I'd been documenting around the destroyed campsites. This print was even clearer than any I'd seen before, showing individual toe impressions and what looked like the texture of thick, calloused skin across the heel and ball of the foot. The print was fresh, couldn't have been more than a day old based on how crisp the edges were, but what truly unsettled me was the location. The footprint was positioned right beside where I'd been kneeling while working on the camera mount, close enough that whatever made it could have reached out and touched me while I focused on my task. The realization sent a chill cascading down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I finished the camera setup as quickly as I could manage, double-checking that each unit was properly mounted and functioning before hurrying away from the clearing. Walking back toward my car, I kept looking over my shoulder. The sensation of being watched was stronger than ever, and I found myself moving faster than I normally would on the steep, root-crossed terrain. Several times I was certain I heard something moving parallel to my path through the trees, staying just out of sight, but matching my pace with disturbing precision. At one point, I stopped completely and held my breath, listening. For perhaps 10 seconds, everything was silent. Then I heard what sounded like a heavy branch snapping somewhere behind me, followed by the rustle of something large moving through thick undergrowth. When I spun around, I couldn't see anything, but the section of forest in that direction had gone completely silent, as if everything living had suddenly fled or frozen in place. 3 days later, I decided to check my cameras early. The original plan had been to wait a full week, but curiosity overpowered caution. I needed to see what the expanded setup had recorded. The hike back to the clearing was uneventful until I got close to my camera positions. That's when I realized something had gone terribly wrong. The first camera I checked, the one I'd mounted near the cave entrance, was gone. Not knocked down by weather or damaged by a falling branch. Gone. The mounting strap I'd used to secure it to the tree had been broken or cut, and the camera itself had been completely removed. I searched the area around the tree for 20 minutes, but I couldn't find any trace of my equipment. The second additional camera, positioned on the far side of the clearing, was still in place, but something had changed its orientation. Instead of pointing toward the center of the clearing as I'd intended, the camera was now aimed back toward the main trail, the direction I always approached from. Someone or something had figured out where I came from and adjusted my equipment to watch for my return. My original camera remained in its initial position, but when I approached to examine it, I could see large, smudged prints on the lens housing. Not human fingerprints. These were much larger with a different ridge pattern, and they suggested that something with enormous hands had picked up the camera and examined it closely before replacing it in its mount. Walking around the clearing, I found fresh footprints everywhere. The recent rains had left the ground soft, and the tracks were clear and numerous. Whatever had visited had spent considerable time in the area, approaching each camera location and systematically studying my surveillance equipment. The most disturbing discovery was a set of prints that formed a complete circuit around the clearing, staying just inside the tree line. Something had walked the entire perimeter, probably while I wasn't present, checking each camera position from multiple angles. The realization that the creature had not only found my cameras, but had actively manipulated them and stolen one was profoundly disturbing. It demonstrated a level of intelligence and intentionality that made me question everything I thought I knew about what was living in these forests. Standing in the middle of that clearing, surrounded by evidence that something had been systematically examining my equipment, I felt more vulnerable and exposed than I'd ever felt in my life. Whatever was out there knew I was watching it, and it was watching me right back. I retrieved the memory cards from my 2 remaining cameras and left the clearing, moving faster than I normally would on the rough terrain. That evening, I loaded the memory cards and discovered that my worst suspicions were justified. The cameras had captured extensive footage of the creature examining my equipment and moving around the clearing. The images were clearer than my first batch, showing more detail of what I was dealing with. The creature was definitely bipedal, definitely intelligent, and definitely much larger than any known animal in the region. The footage showed it approaching each camera location, spending several minutes examining each setup with what appeared to be careful, systematic attention. In one particularly striking image, the creature was looking directly into my original camera lens from just a few feet away, close enough that I could make out the texture of its facial features and the glint of reflected infrared light in its deep-set eyes. But the most disturbing image was the last one captured before my arrival to check the cameras. The timestamp showed it was taken barely 2 hours before I reached the clearing. The creature was standing at the edge of the tree line, partially concealed behind a massive hemlock trunk, and appeared to be watching the trail I would be approaching on. It had been waiting for me. The next morning, I made a decision that went against every instinct, telling me to stay far away from that clearing. If the creature was as intelligent as it appeared to be, perhaps I could observe its behavior directly rather than relying on trail cameras that it could easily avoid or manipulate. Against every warning, my rational mind was screaming at me. I decided to spend a night in the forest near the clearing. I spent the afternoon preparing for an overnight camping trip. I packed light, just a small 2-person tent, a sleeping bag rated for cold weather, basic food and water for one night, and the essentials for emergency situations. I also brought a powerful LED flashlight with fresh batteries and the 12-gauge shotgun I kept for bear encounters. The plan was to set up camp about 200 yards from the clearing in a position that would give me a clear view of the area while keeping me out of the immediate vicinity. I found a good camping spot on a small rise overlooking the clearing. The position gave me a clear line of sight to the cave entrance and most of the open area while keeping me elevated and partially concealed behind a cluster of moss-covered boulders. I set up my tent with practiced efficiency and settled in to wait for darkness. Around 10:15, things began to change. The normal night sounds started to fade one by one, like someone slowly turning down the volume on a radio. Within 15 minutes, the forest had become almost completely silent. That's when I heard the footsteps. They started somewhere to my right, moving slowly through the forest in the direction of the clearing below. The sound was unmistakable, something large walking on two legs, placing each foot with deliberate care. The steps were too heavy and too widely spaced to be human. For nearly an hour, I could hear it moving around the perimeter of the open area, sometimes stopping for long stretches, sometimes advancing a few steps before pausing again. Around midnight, the footsteps stopped. The forest remained silent for another 30 minutes. The first indication that I was no longer alone on the rise came as the sound of something large moving through the trees directly behind my camping position. Then I heard footsteps on my left side, moving parallel to the rise, and more movement on my right. The realization hit me like a physical blow. There wasn't just one creature out there. Multiple somethings were moving around my camping spot, staying hidden in the darkness, but making no effort to conceal the sounds of their approach. For the next 2 hours, I sat motionless against the boulder, the shotgun raised and ready, listening to movement all around my position. Several times, I heard what sounded like soft vocalizations, low rumbling sounds that seemed to carry meaning, as if they were communicating with each other. Around 3 in the morning, everything went quiet again. Just before dawn, I dozed off for a few minutes while leaning against the cold boulder. I woke up when I heard my tent zipper being opened. The sound was absolutely unmistakable, that distinctive metallic rasp of a zipper being slowly, carefully pulled down. I opened my eyes and looked toward my tent. In the dim pre-dawn light, I could see a large, dark shape crouched next to the tent entrance, manipulating the zipper with what appeared to be remarkable dexterity. I held my breath and remained completely motionless, every muscle frozen. The creature spent several minutes examining the inside of my tent, reaching in and moving things around quietly and carefully. At one point, it pulled out my sleeping bag and seemed to be feeling the material. When it finished with the tent, the creature moved over to my backpack, going through the contents, removing items one by one, examining them with apparent fascination, then putting them back roughly where they'd been. After perhaps 20 minutes, the creature seemed to lose interest in my camping gear. It straightened up, a movement that made me acutely aware of just how tall it actually was, and moved away from my campsite, heading back toward the tree line. I lost sight of it in the growing dawn light. Examining my tent and backpack in daylight, I was struck by how carefully everything had been handled. Nothing was damaged or destroyed. It could easily have destroyed my equipment or attacked me. Instead, it had conducted what seemed like a careful, almost scientific investigation of my presence in its territory. Looking around the camping area, I found footprints everywhere, showing at least 3 distinct individuals. But the most disturbing discovery was waiting for me at my car. Large handprints covered the driver's side door and window, much larger than human hands, showing the same distinctive pattern I'd seen on my trail camera. Whatever had visited my campsite had also found my car and examined it thoroughly. They knew where I'd come from, where I'd camped, and how I planned to leave the area. I drove home as quickly as the winding mountain roads would allow, desperate to put distance between myself and an area where I was clearly outmatched. The experience had fundamentally changed my understanding of those forests. They were home to something I didn't understand, something that was now very much aware of my existence. That evening, I spent hours researching what I'd experienced online. I found hundreds, perhaps thousands, of similar reports from wilderness areas across North America. People describing encounters with large, intelligent, bipedal creatures that showed remarkable curiosity about human activities. What worried me most were the accounts of increasingly bold behavior. Many of the more recent reports described creatures that were no longer content to remain hidden. They were approaching campsites, examining equipment, and in some cases, actively tracking and observing human visitors. The escalation pattern was clear and disturbing. Over the following weeks, I tried to stay away from that area of the forest, but avoiding the area didn't seem to be enough. I started noticing signs that my nighttime visitors might not have been content to remain in their remote forest territory. Footprints in the soft earth around my apartment building after heavy rains, positioned under my bedroom window. The sense of being watched when I took out my garbage after dark. The first definitive proof came about a month after my camping experience. I woke up one morning and went to open my curtains, only to find handprints on the outside of my bedroom window, large, distinctive handprints showing the same pattern I'd seen on my car. The prints were positioned at a height that would have required something at least 8 feet tall to make them, and my apartment is on the second floor. The realization that one or more of these creatures had followed me from the forest, found where I lived, approached my building during the night and looked through my bedroom window while I slept was terrifying beyond my ability to adequately describe. The safety and security of my own home had been compromised. 2 days after finding the handprints, I came home from work to find something waiting in the parking lot behind my building. The trail camera that had been stolen from the clearing, placed carefully on the hood of my car. The camera appeared undamaged, and when I checked the memory card, I found dozens of images that hadn't been there when it was taken. Some of the photos were almost beautiful in a strange and unsettling way. A waterfall cascading over moss-covered rocks, photographed from below. A family of deer grazing in a meadow, captured from a hiding spot in thick undergrowth. The entrance to a cave much larger than the one near the clearing, photographed from inside looking out at a view of distant mountains I couldn't identify. But the final images were the most disturbing. They showed my apartment building, my parking space, my balcony with its small collection of plants, my bedroom window, photographed from the outside at night when the lights were on, and my silhouette would have been clearly visible through the curtains. The camera had been used to document a systematic surveillance of my living situation. The message was unmistakable. They knew where I lived. They had the intelligence and dexterity to operate complex electronic equipment, and they were informing me that my withdrawal from their territory hadn't ended their interest in me. That night, I heard sounds outside my apartment that confirmed my worst fears. Heavy footsteps moving around the parking lot below, long pauses beneath my window, the creak of the wooden staircase that led to the building's second floor, shuffling sounds in the hallway outside my door. The next morning, I made the hardest decision I'd ever faced. I called my supervisor at the veterinary clinic and gave 2 weeks' notice. I contacted a realtor about putting my apartment on the market. I sold all my outdoor equipment, the cameras and camping gear and hiking boots that had been such central parts of my identity. I began making plans to move somewhere far from forests and mountains, somewhere flat and urban and populated, somewhere that, whatever had taken such interest in me, would be unlikely or unwilling to follow. It felt like surrender, and in many ways it was. But it also felt like the only rational response to a situation that had spiraled completely beyond my ability to understand or control. It's been over a year now since my last definitive encounter, and I've started to feel like I might have successfully extracted myself from a situation that could have ended much worse. I have a new job, a new apartment, in a busy neighborhood where I'm never truly alone, a new life that has nothing to do with the wilderness I once loved so deeply. But I still don't venture into remote areas, and I still check my surroundings regularly. The experience changed my entire understanding of what might be living in the vast wilderness areas that still cover so much of this continent. There are places out there where things exist that most people would find impossible to believe. And some of those things are intelligent enough to understand when they're being watched and studied, intelligent enough to turn the surveillance back on the watcher. I've never told this story to anyone before, partly because I know how it sounds, but I've also never stopped thinking about what I experienced and what it might mean for other people who venture into areas where they might not be as alone as they believe. The forests are still there, still vast and wild and ancient. And somewhere in those remote clearings and hidden valleys, something is watching and waiting and demonstrating a level of intelligence that makes it far more dangerous than any bear or mountain lion. Not dangerous in the sense of physical violence necessarily, dangerous in the sense of curiosity, of patience, of the willingness to observe and learn and follow. I consider myself lucky to have escaped, but I also know that my curiosity almost cost me much more than that. I know now that there are places in this world where human beings are not the most intelligent observers, not the most patient watchers, not the apex anything. Sometimes, especially on quiet nights when the city sounds fade away and I'm lying alone in the darkness, I still get that feeling. That prickling awareness on the back of my neck, that certainty that something out there is watching. And when that happens, I close my eyes tighter, pull the blankets closer, and remind myself that I made my choice. I chose safety over knowledge. I chose survival over understanding. I chose to walk away from a mystery that could have consumed me entirely. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some questions should never be answered. And some things watching from the darkness are best left unwatched in return. I just wish I could stop wondering what they wanted, what they were trying to learn, what they might have done if I hadn't retreated when I did. These questions follow me through my days and haunt my nights, unanswerable and endless. The price I pay for a glimpse of something that was never meant to be seen. The woman I was before that autumn. The confident outdoors woman who thought she knew every secret those mountains held. She's gone now. In her place is someone more cautious, more aware, more respectful of the boundaries between the human world and the older stranger world that exists alongside it. I hope anyone who reads this will understand that I'm not telling this story to convince anyone of anything. I'm simply sharing what happened to me as accurately and honestly as I can remember it. Because I think some experiences need to be recorded even when they can't be explained. Be careful out there. Pay attention to the silence. Trust the feeling when your instincts scream that you're being watched. And if you find massive footprints around your campsite, if your trail cameras start moving on their own, if the forest goes quiet in ways that feel deliberate rather than natural, walk away. Just walk away and don't look back. Because some things in this world are better left undiscovered, and some discoveries once made can never be unmade. I learned that lesson the hard way, in the deep forests of the Allegheny Mountains, during an autumn that changed everything I thought I knew about the world and my place in it. I survived. But survival came at a cost I'm still paying, and probably always will. The woman who used to hike those trails with confidence and joy, camera in hand and wonder in her heart, she's gone forever. And in her place is someone who flinches at shadows, who checks windows compulsively, who will never again feel completely safe in the world. That's the real price of knowing, not the sleepless nights or the lost career or the apartment I had to abandon. It's the loss of innocence. The destruction of the comforting illusion that we understand the world we live in. Those boundaries are thinner than most people realize, and on the other side of them, things are watching, learning, waiting. I know because I looked back, and something looked right back at me.